So I'm still at it. Well, what happened was in June of 1965, I was 29 years of age, and I said, Carol, we're going to take a 2-week vacation. We're going to just get out of here and away from signs, away from the pressure. We're going to take a vacation. We're going to go to Las Vegas for a few days. I'd never been to Palm Springs. I didn't even know where it was. And we're going to go over there and see what Palm Springs is all about. On the third day in Las Vegas, at the Sahara Hotel at that time, came down from the room and the newspaper stand. There was great big headlines across the front page. LBJ decides billboards are to come down. What does that mean? And in the article, it described that this bill that was going through Congress was going to be a birthday gift from Lyndon Baines Johnson, the President of the United States, to his wife, Lady Bird Johnson. And this piece of legislation was known as the Lady Bird Bill. Now, what happened was, this was in June when I saw the ad, or the headline, not the ad by any means. It was an article, obviously. Now, billboards consisted of 2 different types of highways. One is the interstate system, which is 47,000 miles. The second is the primary road system, which is 220,000 miles. Now, what is the primary road system? That is any system or any road where the federal government participated in any degree with federal funds in the building of that road was then added to the primary road system. So you take State Street, for example. State Street here in Salt Lake City, the federal government participated in the building of State Street in its final analysis, in its current configuration. They put money in there. So therefore, that's part of the primary road system. So I wanted to make that very, very clear to you. Now, the government, thanks to Everett Dirksen from the state of Illinois, when this bill was going through the Senate, because the original bill did not call for the recognition and the payment of just compensation for signs. So they're going to steal the signs. They're going to just take the signs. So Everett Dirksen got up there and offered an amendment to that bill, which basically said that the government would pay for all signs that came down. So the question then would become, well, how are they going to pay? What the basis of the payment? How do you determine value? And on you go. And will they really pay? But then it also said that any billboard built after the date that this bill was passed through Congress, any billboards built after that, they would not pay for. So it forced the sign companies to not keep building signs. Now, it also said that the payment schedule and the takedown would take place 4.5 years after that bill passed Congress, so that the sign company would have 4.5 years before the signs started to come down. Well, I get a call from the bank. Now, when I saw this headline in Las Vegas, I didn't go to Palm Springs. We turned around and we came right back home. I had 80 employees, roughly, and they were all waiting for me. What's going to happen? What's going to happen to us? What can we do? Now, I had about $1 million worth of backlog of signs to be built. And basically, I said, we can't build these signs. It's really kind of against the law. I will finish contracts that I am in the process of finishing. I'll finish those out. That's it. And so I went down from 80 to 18. It was a very, very bitter and a painful time in my life. Hard to sleep. My hair was falling out. It was hell on earth. Well, I had all this mail piled up when I was gone, and I get this one letter from the bank. And the letter required that I pay off the note at the bank, which in today's money would be around $10 million in 30 days. So I phoned, arranged to meet with them. And I get up there in front of Tom Fry, with a number 2 man at the biggest bank in the state of Idaho. I had made the mistake of cramming all these other billboard contracts into the one bank. The big bank, Idaho First National, paid off other banks, paid them off, and they assumed all of the financing of my signs, except the Bank of Idaho and Harris Cliff. Now, I'm sitting there in front of Tom Fry, and he said, we're going to give you 90 days to pay this note off. We're going to extend it 60 days. And if you don't pay it off, we're going to take over your sign company. I said, why would you do that? Do you think you can run a sign company better than me? He said, well, you got a good point there. But that's our position right now. I said, we're still collecting money on these signs. Mr. Snar, here's your balance sheet. The way your balance sheet reads right now, you're a rich person. You can easily handle this loan that we have got with you at this bank. But that was yesterday. But we're talking about today. He said, the way we see it and our attorneys see it is that the asset side of your balance sheet, which consists of cash and the equipment and etc. that you own and all of those billboards, including the accounts receivable on those billboards and the billboards themselves, basically is zero. And so what you've got really is the liability of this loan that you have with our bank and the Bank of Idaho, the balance of the Bank of Idaho. You don't qualify. I said, but the bill says that they'll pay for the signs. Mr. Snar, you're naive. The United States government is the worst credit risk in the world. From our point of view, from our experience. Just because they say they're going to pay for it, do you think they're going to pay for those signs? You've got a lot to learn. He said, let's take, for example, you got a sign here on State Street here in Boise, Idaho. How much will they pay for that sign? I don't have a clue. Well, you have a value on that sign, which is a part of the totality of the value of all the signs that you've got. And that totality is on the asset side of your balance sheet. But what would they pay for that one sign? I think you ought to find out. And then you come back and tell me. But you're going to discover this. You're in for one hell of a tough sledding. And we're not going to live through that tough sledding with you because we know we're not going to get the money. So we would rather close you down, collect all the money ourselves as much as we possibly can, put it against that loan before they start taking those signs down. So I go to the state capitol building where the Idaho Department of Highways is located, and I meet with the head of the highway department in the state of Idaho, a man by the name of Mr. Ellis Mathis. He was a typical 100% successful in every aspect of a very, very disgusting bureaucrat. And I was to learn what that was all about. And I was about to learn not only what that was all about, but a little bit about how government actually works and what's involved. Now, I'll do my best here to kind of explain this to you. Mr. Mathis told me that guinea pigs always die. And you're a guinea pig. They always die. So I asked him about this billboard on State Street. How much would you pay me for that billboard? And also, when will you pay me for that billboard? Mr. Snar, how could you be so naive as to ask me that question? Now, you've got to understand how it really works. He said, what has happened right now in Washington, D.C., is a bill has been passed outlawing billboards. And very clearly stipulates that they're going to have to come down. They give the dates and everything else. Now, this is called an authorization. Washington, D.C. has rooms full of file drawers and file drawers and file drawers of bills that have passed Congress in the context of an authorization, and nothing even happens with those bills. They just sit in the doggone file drawer and they just die there. File drawers after file drawers. But what we have is an authorization. I said, yes, but this authorization, the government might be able to sit on it, but what about me? My bank has just closed me down because of that authorization. So it has impact upon the business world, in my case, billboards owners. But what's their responsibility? Well, the committee that passes the authorization, they've washed their hands of what's going to happen afterwards. And I was just starting to get sick. Now, I'd never heard of authorization before. So he says, what has to happen, Mr. Snar, is what is called appropriation. I said, man, you guys have got big fancy words and they all start with A's. Authorization, now you're talking about appropriation. Now, what's that? Well, that's a separate committee. And it has to pass not only the House, but it's got to pass the House. It's got to pass the Senate. It's got to be signed by the President of the United States. Now, the appropriation is where the money is put in place to pay for the signs. Well, what happens, I asked, if there is never an appropriation? He said, well, what'll probably in reality happen is that you're going to be out of business and the government isn't going to pay for any signs that you own. That's basically where you're sitting, Mr. Snar. I was sick. I don't think I've ever been so sick in my life. So I went from sitting on top of the world to be flat on my back in the middle of that boxing ring. I said, well, then how do you get this authorization up to receive appropriation? How does that take place? He says, well, the people that's against this bill, they're going to fight to kill it. They don't want any appropriation. I said, but I'm a little guy. He said, but the big guys can outlast you. So what they'll do is they'll just pick up what's left over and carry on. So the whole world of outdoor advertising will shrink dramatically to just a few big companies, and all the rest of you little guys, you're just going to be by the wayside. How do you feel about this, Mr. Mathis? That's just the way life is. That's just the way life is, Mr. Snar. What would you do if you were me? I remember asking him that question. What would you do if you were me? He said, I'd sell my company for the first guy that would buy it, regardless of the price, because something is better than nothing. Now, he said, just because the money's been appropriated, that doesn't mean you're going to collect that money. Because the next step is allocation. Now, that is where they take the money and they allocate it to the states. And the states with the most influence and most eager and anxious to have this bill implemented in the first place are going to get the money. And the states that don't care as much, they're not going to get the money. Now, Idaho, we don't care much. I don't think we're going to see a penny in the state of Idaho. And so allocation goes to the states. Now I'm even getting more sick. Well, who determines how the money is to be allocated? Frankly, it's the Department of Transportation in Washington, D.C. And they have their games to play, and they have their favorites. And they go according to those that they like the best. It's called quid pro quo. The states that scratch their backs are the ones that they will scratch the backs of the states. You are really in trouble, Mr. Snar. You're in deep trouble. Well, then what happens next? You just keep throwing these A's at me. What's the next A? I was being very sarcastic. What's the next A, knowing full well that there wasn't any more A's? He said it's called appraisal. Oh, brother, when are these A's going to ever stop manifesting themselves? Appraisal? That's right. We got to go out and appraise the signs. Well, what determines that? Well, we have a department within the highway department here, and they have their means and ways and etc., and they'll determine what the value of the signs are going to be. I remember I left him. I could hardly keep from crying. I didn't cry in front of him, but I knew what it was to be sick. And I knew that this gargantuan albatross around my neck was so great that I could see no way that I could possibly defeat them. How could I? I just had the bank chop me off. They're not going to advance any more funds. And they're taking all the money that's coming in off the signs to get that loan down. And I've got operating costs, and I got a whack like that. And I went to this little drugstore affair. Had a little place where you could just sit there, a little counter, and I ordered me a Coca-Cola. I don't drink Coca-Cola. I said, I think I'm going to see if a Coca-Cola made me feel better than I feel right now. Nothing could make me feel worse, but make me feel better. And I remember I thought about when I was in the first grade, and we had marbles. I'd go to school with 4 marbles and a taw, a flint. And I'd come back with 2 pocketfuls every time. Well, this one kid came along and he said, how about we played ringers? And I just had the hands. I could just take that taw, and I know how to shoot, and I could hit that, and that taw would spin inside that ring, and I could just knock those marbles out until I had cleaned house with my shooting those marbles. I was a winner. Well, he said, why don't you play a game of pots with me? So they'd made 9 little holes, square, 3, 3, 3. And he said, you put your marbles in the pot, then you lag for it. And when your marble goes in, your taw goes into whatever hole it goes into, if there's any marbles in that pot, you get the pot full of marbles. So I went and put every one of my marbles in one of the pots. And he matched me with his marbles. He put it in the same pot. I went first with my flint, and I lagged. And that little ball rolled along, and it hit a little tiny small segment of dirt, piled up, and threw it off course. And I missed. And he pulled out a steely, heavy, and he lagged his. And the little infractions along the way didn't throw that steely off course. It landed in the pot. He got them all. I learned a lot then. I said, that's just what's happened to me. I had all these marbles in this pot on one lag. I got nothing. On paper, and with that bank, I'm finished. I got nothing. Well, I go back to the bank, to Mr. Fry. I've done my homework. If I were you, I'd have done the same thing you did. Because you got to protect the bank. And I respect you for it. But I think that you got to protect me. Because in so doing, I protect you. Because I can run a sign company better than you. I've already told you that. I am prepared to fly back to Boise every month and give you a report as to what's going on. Now, the law also specified that by June of 1970, that each state would be visited by the Department of Highways, and the law would be explained to each Department of Highways in a meeting with all the sign companies within that state invited to that meeting. So I was waiting for that moment. The most amazing thing was this. The first meeting held in the United States was in Salt Lake City. And so we, here in Utah, were all there. And I was all ears. And I can just see him now. Those consummate bureaucrats, with all their answers, knowing full well that a lot of what you were listening to was sheer baloney. To get through the meeting, get out of there, they just wanted, it was very uncomfortable for them. It was all bad news for the sign companies. The state didn't know quite how to take it all and how to react. They were kind of, it all depends upon the state whether they were for or against. We couldn't tell here in Utah what it was. But I knew one thing, that I was starting to feel this resolve that is mentioned in if. If you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve their turn long after they are gone, and so hold on when there's nothing in you except the will which says to them, hold on. I was starting to get a glimpse of what that and those words really meant. But it was hard. It was hard to hold on because I didn't know what to hold on to. What could I rely upon? I couldn't go anywhere and get any answers. But in this meeting, I was impressed by the look of one man. His name was Henry C. Helland. Now, he was the equivalent in Utah to what Ellis Mathis was in Idaho. He was the number one man over the Department of Transportation, let's say, in Utah. They didn't call it that way in those days. It was just roads. The head of the Department of Roads and Transportation. But anyway, he was the head man. Now, I went to his office afterwards, and I said, would you educate me on what really happened in this meeting? Would you be so kind as to use words that I would understand and not all this Washington, D.C.'ese that they were speaking in? I just want to understand where I stand and what's going on. He says, well, I can't imagine your situation being worse than it is. But if I were you, I wouldn't give up. Well, what am I going to hang on to? what is it that I have a chance to, to somehow come out of this? How can I get out of it? He said, well, in Utah, we really don't have any say. We're at the mercy of the Federal Highway Administration. And they are in constant contact with Congress. And the President of the United States has made a birthday present gift to his wife, Lady Bird, that the billboards across America are going to come down. And he's probably the most effective legislator who became a president in the history of the United States. So he knows how to work Congress, and he is a very strong, powerful president. You really are in bad shape. Then I asked him, what would you do if you were me? He said, I think I could advise you in this way. I would hold on. I wouldn't give up yet. Maybe there might be something that might happen. But he said, I must be honest with you. The odds are strongly against you. Will they pay me for my signs? He said, well, I can't answer that because I just don't know.